Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Go ahead and have a seat there.
Thank you.
State your name and spell it for the record, please.
My name is Kelly Cruz. It's Kellylykrusse.
Mr. Nelson?
Thank you, Your Honor. What is your occupation?
I am an associate state medical examiner at the Iowa office of the state medical examiner.
How long have you held that position?
Approximately 6 years.
You're currently employed there, I presume, at the state?
Yes.
And you've been there for 6 years?
Yes.
How long have you been a physician?
I've been a physician since 2013.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Let me show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 25. Can you tell me what that document is?
This is a copy of my CV or my resume.
Is that true and accurate reflection of your educational and work history?
Yes, it is.
I move to admit Exhibit 25.
Any objection? No objection. 25 is admitted.
Could you explain to the jury briefly just what it is you do in your job?
So I'm a board certified forensic pathologist, so I'm trained to perform autopsies. Those are examinations on deceased individuals, primarily to determine the cause of death, so what led for them to die, whether it be a natural disease or an injury, and then I determine manner of death, which describes the circumstances surrounding someone's passing. I perform autopsies, I then write autopsy reports, I interpret toxicology findings, I read medical records, I teach medical students, I provide expert testimony, and do other things within my office, but those are my primary duties.
Thank you. On or about January 19th of this year, did you perform an autopsy on Jennifer Dazey?
Yes, I did.
May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes.
Show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 26. Is that your report of autopsy?
Yes, it is.
I would move to admit Exhibit 26.
Any objection?
No objection.
26 is admitted.
May I approach again?
Yes.
Show you what's been marked Exhibit 26A. Are those photos or some of the photos that are part of your report?
Yes.
Did you select certain photos that you believe would be helpful in describing the injuries and your conclusions?
Yes, I did.
And that's what's contained in that exhibit?
Yes.
Move to admit Exhibit 26A.
Any objection?
No objection.
26A is admitted.
So let's look at your autopsy report. And on page 1, you have pathologic diagnoses. Is that sort of a table of contents to the rest of your report?
Yes, it is.
And it's a list of findings from your autopsy?
Yes, it's a summary of all of my findings, which includes the cause of death and any additional findings.
And then you elaborate as your report goes on, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, in Exhibit 26A, that group of photos, is that something that helps you in describing your findings in the report?
Yes.
So let's start with your pathologic diagnosis number 1. And at any time when we go through and you're explaining this, if you would like a photo put up, let us know which one and we can put that up.
Okay.
So on pathologic diagnosis number 1, could you explain what that means?
So the first diagnosis is my cause of death. The cause of death in this case was multiple sharp force injuries. Underneath that 1, I have an A, a B, and a C, where I group sharp force injuries in terms of location on the body. There were 3 main locations that had sharp force injuries: the head, the neck, and the left hand.
So under A, does that separate out those injuries to the head?
Yes, A describes the injuries to the head. There were a total of 13 sharp force injuries. There were cutting wounds and chopping wounds to the head.
And then under B?
Under B, there were injuries to the neck, a total of 2 chopping wounds to the neck. And then C lists another 2 chopping wounds, this time to the left hand.
And then under Roman numeral 2, additional injuries?
For additional injuries, in addition to the sharp force injuries, there were blunt force injuries. So injuries due to the body coming into contact with something with a flat surface. There was a contusion or a bruise on the back of the left forearm and some bleeding under the scalp on the left side of the head.
That would be the subgaleal hemorrhage?
Yes.
Then we've got Roman numeral 3 through 6. Do those relate to your cause of death finding?
No, as part of these diagnoses, I'll list natural diseases that I find. Even though someone may have obvious injury, I may know exactly why they die, I'd still perform a full autopsy and document all of my findings. So they're essentially incidental natural findings.
Okay, so let's go back to your evidence of injury. And we start out with the head wounds. Would you like a photograph there?
Yes. In terms of organization, I listed the head wounds first. I start on the right side of the head, then the left side of the head, move from top to bottom. So the first injuries listed are seen in picture number 4.
This one. May we publish, Your Honor?
Yes.
So this photo is looking at the right side of the upper forehead. Here there are a total of 3 chopping wounds. The largest has a squared appearance. It created a skin flap with the skin can be reflected upward. And on the lateral aspect of the head, when looking at the photo, it's on your left, there are 2 additional chopping wounds at the border of that larger chopping wound. That wound injured the skin and any soft tissue underneath the skin, and then it injured the frontal bone underneath it.
Did that particular wound penetrate the skull?
No, it only injured the outer surface of the skull.
All right. Where do you want to go from there?
The next wound that's listed is on the right side of the face, and that's seen in photo number 5. This is showing the right side of Miss Dazey's face, and there's a chopping wound on the right cheek. This chopping wound injured the skin, the soft tissue of the right cheek, and then the right side of the mandible or the jawbone.
What was the depth of that wound?
The depth of that wound was 1 5/8 inches.
Okay, what would be next?
The next wounds all were on the left side of the head, and these can be seen in photo 6.
Could you describe what your findings are there?
Here we have the top 2 larger wounds are chopping wounds. Both injured the skin, the soft tissue underneath the skin, the skull, the dura, which is a thin layer of tissue that covers the brain, and then the brain itself. That topmost chopping wound, within that wound is silver metal. That's from the decedent's previous brain surgery. The chopping wound actually fragmented that surgical material. Both resulted in fractures not only of the bone that was directly underneath the skin, but they resulted in fractures of the base of the skull. The topmost chopping wound injured part of the skull that's near the left eye, and then the lower one injured part of the skull that's near the ear canal. In between those 2 chopping wounds are 2 small cutting wounds. Cutting wounds just injured the superficial soft tissue or the skin. Below that second chopping wound is a small cutting wound on the face right in front of the left ear. Next, there were a total of, I was able to count with certainty 4 cutting wounds to the left ear. They were intersecting, but there were at least 4 cutting wounds to the left ear. And so those were all of the chopping and cutting wounds to the left side of the head.
I have left a laser pointer up there. If you find that you want to point something out up here on the screen as part of your explanation, feel free to do so.
Thank you.
Okay, so where should we move to next?
Next, I described the wounds to the neck, which are in photo 7. One of the wounds can be seen in this photo, and then this is just an extension. These are the cutting wounds of the neck, and then photo 7 shows both of them together, more on the back of the neck. So there were 2 chopping wounds to the left side of the neck, one more toward the front and one more toward the back. Those injured the soft tissue of the neck and then bones of the upper cervical spine. I did not appreciate any injury to the spinal cord itself, and those had a maximum depth of 2 inches.
What would be your next finding?
And then the next part of the body that had sharp force injury was the left hand. One of the injuries can be seen in photo 8. So this is looking at the left hand, the back of the left hand near the left thumb. Here is a curved chopping wound that created a skin flap that can be reflected upward. This injured the soft tissue of the hand and then a bone of the hand near the left thumb. Photo 9 shows the last chopping wound. This is the left hand again. So this is a chopping wound that injured 3 fingers, the index, the middle, and the ring fingers. The index finger has a pretty superficial wound by the fingernail. The middle finger was amputated as a result of the chopping wound, and the ring finger was nearly amputated as a result of the chopping wound. There's just some skin left that's connecting the finger to the hand. Injuries here included soft tissue and then bones of the fingers.
Are there any other findings that you think you need to touch on?
Those were all the sharp force injuries that I found, and then the additional blunt force injuries of the bruise of the left forearm, and then some bleeding under the scalp. And those are the only injuries that I documented in my autopsy.
All right, just for a little housekeeping, I think I glossed over this, but the photo number 1. Could you describe what that is?
So when an individual is declared deceased and is going to be transported to my office for an autopsy, they're placed in a body bag, and that body bag is locked and labeled. So the blue lock there has a number on it that's documented at the scene and then documented in my autopsy report. That's important for maintaining chain of custody. And then the tag says who's in the body bag. A photograph here is taken to show that the body is received exactly as it was placed into the bag at the scene.
And that would be photo number 2, that photograph?
And then photo number 2 shows her exactly as she was received, with personal effects that include a pillow and 2 blankets.
And then photo number 3?
Photo number 3 is what we call an identification photo. Part of my job is also to confirm identity of the deceased individuals on whom I perform autopsies. We will compare them to their driver's license photos, other forms of visual ID, and then use surgical history and so on. So this is an example of an identification photo, which I compared to her driver's license photo. Her driver's license came with her to autopsy.
So once again, your cause of death was?
The cause of death was multiple sharp force injuries.
And specifically, can you identify any of those injuries that you believe were the fatal ones?
Really, you can die of any sort of sharp force injury or injury itself. In terms of the injuries that caused the most damage, especially damage to vital structures, those were the 2 chopping wounds on the left side of the head that injured the skull, the dura, the brain, and caused bleeding around the brain.
Thank you. May I approach?
Yes.
Let me show you what's been marked as Exhibit 14. Is that instrument consistent with the injuries that you viewed on Ms. Dazey?
Yes, this instrument could have caused those injuries that I documented.
And you can't say for certain as a physician that that is, but you can say it's certainly consistent with, is that right?
Correct.
And if you look at the blade of that instrument and the width, would it certainly be consistent with a blow from that instrument to take off the 2 inside fingers of a hand and injure the one but leave the other intact?
Yes.
The narrowness of the blade?
Yes.
Thank you. I don't have anything further. Can I ask one question, Your Honor?
Yes, go ahead.
Kind of got ahead of myself.
Go ahead.
If Jennifer Dazey's blood and DNA were found on that instrument, would that increase the likelihood of that being the instrument of her death?
From an autopsy standpoint, it doesn't change anything, but from an investigative standpoint, that would make sense, yes.
Thank you. Now I have nothing further.
Cross-examination.
Likewise, if that instrument had been in her home for a significant period of time, where she had been living for a significant period of time, you wouldn't be at all surprised to find her DNA on it, would you?
Her DNA, I suppose, no.
Good morning, doctor. And I apologize for, I asked the first question, and now I'm going to say good morning.
Good morning.
Were you able to develop any timeline regarding the injuries?
No.
And were you able to develop a time of death?
No. For the death certificate, when it says date and time of death, it's when she was found and pronounced dead.
Okay. So you're not able to actually tell when this occurred, are you?
No.
Under your manner of death, you indicated that the manner of death was homicide?
Yes.
Now, specifically, what does that mean to you?
Homicide is a medical determination. So unlike cause, where I have many different options, manner of death I only have 5, a homicide being one of them. And homicide to me, it means death at the hands of another.
Okay. So that's a medical determination, not a legal conclusion.
Correct.
All right. And there's a distinction between those 2 things, isn't there?
Yes.
You're not making any statement with regards to guilt or innocence or who did it or any of that, are you?
No, I am not.
Okay. I don't have anything further. Thank you.
Mr. Nelson?
In terms of timelines and time of death, you were not even asked to do that, were you?
No, that's not part of my job. I can document maybe changes that happen after someone dies, but no, that's not part of my report.
And as far as statements of guilt or who did it, you weren't asked to determine that either, were you?
No, that's not part of my job.
Thank you. I don't have anything further.
Thank you, ma'am. You're free to go.
Thank you.
Another witness for the state?
We would call Stacy Schmeiser,
Okay.
and I think this is Zoom.
Let's do this. Let's give the jury about 5 minutes while we set this up and make sure that we can connect with the next witness. Folks, we're going to give you a real short break. Please be seated, everyone. Ma'am, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. You need to take an oath before you testify. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Can I have you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
State your name and spell it for the record, please.
Stacy Schmeiser, Staci, Meiser.
Mr. Nelson, go right ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Schmeiser, what is your current occupation?
I am a criminalist with the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigations.
How long have you been there?
I've been here approximately 25 years.
All right. We have here an Exhibit 30, which is your CV. I can't obviously show that to you because we're Zooming, but you know your CV, I trust?
Yes.
Is that a complete and accurate representation of your qualifications and educational and work history?
Yes, it is.
I would move to admit Exhibit 30, Your Honor, by agreement.
Any objection? No, Your Honor. 30 is admitted.
As part of your functions, job functions, did you receive a blood specimen from the Dubuque Police Department on or about January 30th of this year?
Yes, it was received into the laboratory on January 31st.
Okay. From whom was that specimen taken?
The name on the specimen was Tyler Dazey.
Was there an initial, well, let me go back. What exactly screening? What is your function?
In this case, I confirmed the drugs present in the urine, or I'm sorry, in the blood.
So that is part of your job. You test the blood, and what are you testing for?
We test for controlled substances in the blood.
Okay. Was there an initial screening done on that specimen before you received it?
Yes, there was.
What's the purpose of the initial screening?
The initial screening is done in the laboratory to give an idea of what additional testing it may require.
Would it be safe to say that if you had an initial screening and came up with nothing, that there would be no further testing?
Yes.
And if you come up positive on certain things on the initial screening, then it comes on to you for confirmation screening?
That's correct.
Okay. Is there anything else in terms of a description of confirmation screening in terms of what you do?
I don't understand what you're asking.
Well, I'm just saying, what exactly is confirmation screening?
Confirmation screening, we use that initial screening test results to know what type of confirmation to run, and then we confirm any drugs that showed up in the initial screening.
And you did, in fact, do the testing and screening, the confirmation screening?
Yes, I did the confirmation screening.
Okay. Did you prepare a report indicating what your findings are?
Yes, I did.
And that would be Exhibit 31, Your Honor. I'd move to admit that.
Any objection? No, Your Honor. 31 is admitted.
Could you explain to the jury here what your findings were?
Yes, I have my report that I'd like to refer to so I don't misstate any of the numbers.
You may.
I found the presence of 11-nor 9-carboxy delta 8 tetrahydrocannabinol greater than 250, which was our highest calibrator. I found the presence of delta 8 tetrahydrocannabinol at 14 nanograms per milliliter. I found the presence of 11-nor 9-carboxy delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol, concentration of 9 nanograms per mil. I confirmed delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol at 5 nanograms per mil, and confirmed the presence of delta 10 tetrahydrocannabinol and hexahydrocannabinol.
Are those all isomers of THC or variants of THC?
They're isomers of THC and metabolites of THC.
So in layman's terms, basically you're saying that this person consumed THC of various sources or from various sources?
Yes.
The numbers that you found, do they indicate heavy use, light use, or can you tell that at all?
It really varies in these type of levels. In a naive user could indicate recent use, but in a chronic user, these numbers can hang around for several days.
Could you explain the variations in these isomers of THC? What exactly are they?
Well, there were 3 types of THC, the delta 8, delta 9, and delta 10. Delta 9 is the one that's been around the longest that I think most of us are referring to when we say THC. There's a ring structure in the compound, and they've just shifted that double bond in that ring structure. So shifting it one way makes it delta 10, shifting it the other way makes it delta 8.
Who would be doing the shifting?
It does occur naturally in the plant, but in very small quantities, so it is more than likely made in a laboratory somewhere.
What would be the purpose in making those changes?
I think originally they started changing the compound to try and circumvent some of the laws. Some of those compounds have become popular because they give a slightly different effect in the high.
Would it be fair to say that some of those variants were lab created for the gummies and those sorts of things that are now being marketed?
Yes.
Did you also test for opiates, fentanyl, amphetamines, barbiturates, and other harder drugs?
That was tested for in the screening test.
And what was the results of that?
Those were negative.
So it'd be safe to say that Mr. Dazey did not consume any of those other drugs. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. I don't have anything further.
Cross-examination.
How are you doing today?
Good.
Good. So what is the differences as far as, I know you said that there can be a difference of highs, but as far as if you mix those, is there any Is there any different effect if you're mixing the different kinds of delta 8, delta 9, delta 10?
They all have very similar effects, so it would be more of an additive effect.
Is there any dangers in mixing those?
There's no dangers per se of mixing those. There could be dangers in the amount that you would consume.
And if you know, what would those dangers be?
Someone can certainly overdose on marijuana. It isn't as dangerous as some of the other drugs, but they may have negative reaction.
Do you know what kind of negative reactions?
Just decreased mobility, decreased attention to details, changes in thoughts, mood, behavior.
Is sometimes paranoia a side effect?
Paranoia, anxiousness can be a side effect, yes.
And when they say tetrahydrocannabinol, what does that mean?
That's the compound that we're referring to as THC. It's the active component of marijuana.
And is there a difference between a blood test and a urine test?
Yes, there is.
And what is that difference?
Blood test shows what is currently in the blood. It typically has a little tighter time frame window. Urine test shows what's already been metabolized and excreted from the body.
And when you say a metabolite, what does that mean?
That's what the body breaks the compounds down in order to excrete them from the body. So we would call that a metabolite.
And are you looking for metabolites in the blood, or are you looking for something different?
We look for both metabolites and parent compounds.
No further questions.
Mr. Nelson, anything else for this witness?
Yes, you didn't find any dangerous levels in the specimen that you tested, did you?
No, I did not.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Okay, Mr. Nelson, who's the next witness going to be?
Joe Moret.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms. Meiser.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Can you please raise your right hand for me? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Can you state your name and spell it for the record, please?
My name is Joseph Daniel Moret, Joseph Daniel Morrett.
Go ahead, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you. What is your current occupation?
I am a criminalist at the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation Criminalistics Laboratory.
How long have you been employed there?
A little bit over 4 years.
Did you have any work experience prior to that?
I ran the biolab at a company called Ajinomoto North America in Eddyville, Iowa.
You provided a statement of qualifications. Is that an accurate representation of your educational and work history as well as your qualifications?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, I'd move to admit Exhibit 32, which is the statement of qualifications.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
32 is admitted.
While we're at it, I would ask to admit his report, Exhibit 33.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
33 is also admitted.
Could you briefly explain what it is that you do as part of your job function?
I work in the toxicology section of the lab. And in the toxicology section, we test blood and urine for the presence of drugs and alcohol.
So on January 30th or 31st of this year, did you receive a urine specimen from the Dubuque Police Department?
There was a urine specimen received by the evidence room, yes.
Okay. Do you know from whom that specimen was collected?
The sample was labeled Tyler Dazey.
Did you test or analyze that specimen?
I did.
Was there a preliminary screening done before you got the specimen?
Yes, there was.
What was the purpose of that preliminary screen?
The preliminary screen tests for classes or categories of drugs. If there is any of those tests that reach the threshold level of a positive screen, we send it on for confirmation testing, which is a separate type. There we will look and confirm a specific drug from that class.
Did you in fact do the confirmation testing on this specimen?
I did.
Did you also do a report on your findings?
I did.
And we have labeled that Exhibit 33. Could you explain to the jury what your findings were?
I found 2 drugs in the urine specimen. They are 11-nor-9-carboxy delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol and 11-nor-9-carboxy delta-8 tetrahydrocannabinol. And these are simply breakdown products of THC that someone has consumed.
And we had a little discussion previously about different versions of THC. Could you just briefly tell me what you know about that, between like the delta-9, delta-8s?
So the structure of the drug overall is very similar. The only difference between the two is the positioning of a double bond on a molecule. Everything else on the drug is exactly the same shape. And since they're so closely related, they have similar effects on a human body.
Did you also test for opiates, fentanyl, barbiturates, amphetamines, and other substances?
The screen testing did. I did not test for any of those.
So if the screen testing came back negative on those, there would be essentially nothing above the threshold on those substances. Is that correct?
Correct.
So would the bottom line conclusion be that Mr. Dazey ingested certain forms of THC but no other hard drugs?
At a level that would create a positive screen, correct?
Okay. What would be the difference between what you did and what Mr. Claybaugh did? Both of you tested urine.
Mr. Claybaugh did what we call an expanded screen. This test for a number of drugs that the initial screen doesn't cover. A lot of these are prescription drugs and less common drugs of abuse. So he looked to analyze for those drugs, and I believe he also did not find any controlled substances.
So we do an initial screen. If there's a positive there, then it goes on to confirmation. And then from there, it may go on to somebody else for additional testing for further substances. Is that accurate?
It depends on the case. Some cases do qualify for further testing, some don't.
All right. Thank you very much. I don't have any further questions.
Cross-examination.
Good morning. How are you doing today?
Good, how are you?
Good. When you do the test of the urine, what's the timeline? How far back can your, test read?
Our test will only determine what quantity of drugs were in the urine at the time it was collected. So whatever time the urine was collected is the moment and space that we're analyzing.
Okay. Is there any degrading of the metabolites the longer that the sample is held?
It's possible that things can degrade slowly. We keep our samples refrigerated to help minimize that loss.
And do you know is there a time range from when the person ingested it to where it would unlikely show on the test anymore?
That very much depends on the manner in which they ingest it. If they are an infrequent user, a urine test would probably show for anywhere from 1 to 3 days. If they're a frequent user, they can test positive for weeks afterwards, even if they're not continuously using.
No further questions.
Mr. Nelson?
Nothing further.
And who's our next witness, Mr. Nelson?
That would be Heidi Rogowski.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you raise your right hand for me, please? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
State your name and spell it for the record, please.
Heidi, Heidi, Rogowski, Rogowski.
Go ahead, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Your Honor. Well, what is your occupation?
I currently work as a criminalist for the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation at their criminalistics laboratory in Ankeny, Iowa.
How long have you been employed there?
I started with them in March of 2022, so just under 2.5 years.
You have sent a statement of qualifications along, and I ask, is that an accurate representation of your education, training, qualifications, and work history?
Can you tell me the date on that document?
Revised June 27th of 2024.
Yes, that will be the most recent copy.
And that would be Exhibit 39. Your Honor, I'd move to admit that.
Any objection?
No objection.
39 is admitted.
You hold a master's degree in forensic science, is that correct?
Yes, I do.
They also have many hours of specialized training on prints.
Yes, I completed over 500 hours of specialized training through external vendors in the form of specialized coursework and attending professional conferences.
Could you explain to the jury here just what it is that you do?
My job focuses on the examination of items of evidence for the presence of latent prints. So items submitted to our laboratory, I will examine them to try to see or develop latent prints on those items. Those developed impressions can then be preserved through photography or lifting, and then that development is subsequently analyzed and compared to try to attribute those impressions to a particular source.
Could you just tell me what exactly is a latent print versus a known print?
A latent print is the chance reproduction of the friction-ridged skin. So on the palms of our hands and the soles of our feet, we have a specialized type of skin known as friction-ridged skin. When this skin comes in contact with the surface of an item, there's the potential that an impression can be left behind. It acts similar to a rubber stamp, and then the sweat and oils located on that skin act as like an ink, leaving behind an impression. A latent print is considered a chance reproduction, and it happens naturally when the skin comes in contact with a surface just due to routine touching and handling. A known print is going to be the intentional reproduction of the friction-ridged skin. These are captured under controlled conditions where the goal is to record someone's friction-ridged skin. These are generally captured through physical means like inks and powders, or we can capture them digitally through a specialized device called a live scan.
What are the basic factors in the use of friction-ridged skin as a means of identification?
We can use friction-ridged skin as a means for identification due to the nature of friction-ridged skin itself. So the features within your friction-ridged skin vary significantly within the population. So if enough of those features are present in an impression, we can reliably differentiate one individual's impressions from another. Additionally, the skin is generally stable through adolescence to middle adulthood, and that allows us to verify an individual's identity over time.
Could you briefly describe the methodology or process that you use in making comparisons?
When we develop a latent impression, we go through a process known as ACE-B. ACE-B stands for analysis, comparison, evaluation, and verification. During the analysis phase, we will assess the developed latent print to see if there are enough of those features present to move it forward to compare. If there is a lack of those features, our examination will halt and we will not proceed further. If there are enough features present, we will move on to comparison. Comparison is a process where we compare side by side the features within the latent print to the features within a known print. We look to see A, is the feature present in both impressions? B, is the sequence of all of those features in agreement as well? And then C, we look for if their spatial relationships or where they lie within the imprint are also in agreement. As that process moves forward, we transition into evaluation. This is ultimately where we arrive at a conclusion, and those conclusions generally are identification, the latent print and the known print originated from the same source; exclusion, the latent print and the known print originated from different sources; and inconclusive, where due to one reason or another, we're not able to definitively identify or exclude the impression. The final step is verification. This is when a second trained examiner will repeat the process of analyzing the latent print, doing a comparison, and then arriving at a conclusion. If those conclusions are in agreement with one another, we will report out our findings.
On or about January 30th of this year, did you receive a hatchet from the Dubuque Police Department for testing?
Yes, I did.
Did you analyze or test that hatchet and apply the methodology you have described?
Yes.
Did you prepare a report of your findings?
Yes, I did.
Your Honor, I'd move to admit Exhibit 40 at this time, which is the report.
Any objection?
No objection.
40 is admitted.
Are your conclusions set forth in your report?
Yes, they are.
What are your findings and conclusions?
Based on my examination of the hatchet, I was able to develop one latent palm print that was suitable for comparison. That developed latent palm print was searched through the Iowa Automated Biometric Identification System, and as a result of that search, it was identified to Tyler Dazey.
Where was that latent palm print located on the hatchet?
That palm print was developed on the handle of the hatchet.
The end, or is it somewhere closer to the head? Whereabout on the...
I would have to see the item. There should be markings indicating where that impression was developed.
What would the markings show?
We indicate developed latent prints with an indicator, so it would be the item number and a letter, and then you'll be looking for a bracket, and that indicates source and orientation.
All right, thank you very much. I don't have any further questions.
Cross-examination.
What substances was the print made from? Was that from oil and or sweat from the skin?
The techniques that I used to develop the latent print would react with the regular components of latent print residue, so that would be sweat, oils, things of that matter.
Okay. I guess what I'm trying to get at was this print wasn't left in blood, was it?
The techniques that I use do not generally react with blood, so this impression in particular, I would say it was not in blood.
Okay. Were you able to determine when the print was left on the hatchet?
No, there's no way currently to date when a latent print was deposited on an item.
Are you able to tell how old a latent print is?
No, because we're not able to date when it was placed on an item.
Okay. And how long can a latent print last?
Depending on the conditions and how the item is handled, they can last for basically an indefinite period of time. So it varies, but I wouldn't be able to give you an accurate timeline.
Now, if somebody leaves a latent palm print on an object, and then somebody else comes along and touches that same area and, say, uses that device, what would you expect to see? What effect would that have on the print?
It depends on several factors. So if the second individual was wearing gloves, only the first impression would be left behind. If the touches overlapped, we could have what would be considered a composite. So you could have multiple impressions sitting on top of one another. And how the item was handled potentially has the ability to destroy impressions that were previously there.
Okay. You'd call those smudges, wouldn't you?
Smudges can happen during first contact, second contact, but yes, that would be a smearing of the impression.
Okay. Were portions of this palm print readable and other portions were not readable?
Yes.
Okay. In other words, parts of the print were smudged.
Yes, that is common of most latent prints.
And as I understand it, from what you just said, that could indicate movement at the time that the print was deposited, right?
Yes.
Or it could indicate that somebody else used the device or touched the device after the print was deposited.
Yes, I wouldn't be able to determine if it was a result of the initial touch or subsequent handling.
Okay. And just so we're clear, you actually had the hatchet there in your hands, didn't you, when you tested it?
Yes, I did.
Okay. So would you agree with me that there's, if somebody owns that hatchet and they own it for a period of time and they have it in their house, I don't know exactly what you do with an SOG hatchet, but I'm assuming it's either a hunting or a wood cutting device or something to that effect. But in any event, it wouldn't be at all surprising to find their palm print on their own hatchet, would it?
No, it wouldn't. If it belongs to a given individual, it would not be surprising to find their prints on that item.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Mr. Nelson, anything else for this witness?
Yes, Your Honor. If this hatchet was scrubbed or washed in a shower, would you expect the latent prints to be destroyed?
Potentially, water and scrubbing has the ability to wash away or destroy latent impressions. Not having kind of more information, I wouldn't be able to say definitively if there would be no impressions at all.
Would it be more likely that these impressions were placed on the hatchet after the shower as opposed to before, based on your observations of them?
I wouldn't be able to make that determination.
But potentially the shower would wash away latent prints?
There is the potential, yes.
All right, thank you. Nothing further.
Mr. Blair?
Did you see anything on the hatchet which would indicate that that hatchet was cleaned or showered?
The appearance of the ridges had a beading-like appearance in some areas, which would indicate that the residue was potentially extra wet at the time that the latent print was deposited. So I wouldn't count it out that the hatchet could have been wet at the time the latent print was deposited.
Could that also be from sweat?
Yes.
So if somebody touches it when they're very sweaty, that could produce the same thing?
Yes, it'll give the same appearance whether the item is wet at the time of contact or whether the hands are wet at the time of contact.
Nothing further.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Mr. Nelson, are we all finished with the folks from the Ankeny lab?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. You guys can disconnect.
Thank you.
Do we have another witness for the state?
Yes, we have Gage Claybaugh, and that we've done by Zoom, and we've recorded it because he is off in Europe somewhere today. So we would just play that by agreement.
Okay. Do you want to identify for the record, was his testimony taken under oath on a previous date?
Yes, it was an evidentiary deposition.
And is the date identified in the deposition? If not, why don't you place that in the record about when the testimony was given?
That would be July 11th, Judge.
Of 2024, okay.
Correct.
Okay. Do you have that queued up?
I have it ready to go.
What testing did you do?
I did our targeted screen, is what it's called, and so it's a specific testing that we do if a case meets a certain criteria. So that criteria would be sex assaults, death investigations, or if it's requested by the officer. And it looks at different prescription drugs and some miscellaneous drugs.
This list that we have that I've marked as Exhibit 35A with a whole lot of different compounds on it, would that be the compounds that you test for?
Yes.
And what were your findings after doing the testing?
My testing was negative, so of the compounds on that list, I did not find any positives.
Was there positive for marijuana metabolites? Or do you not?
Yes, I did not test for that.
Is that a separate test from someone else at the lab?
Correct, it is a separate test.
And then you did a report concerning your findings, is that correct?
Yep.
And Exhibit 35, would that be the report that you did?
I believe so, yes.
And the report essentially says that you found nothing, is that right?
Yes.
It says, your report says no additional controlled substance. What's the significance of the word additional?
Yeah, so at this time we had separate reports. So we would do the initial screening and confirmational testing on one report, and then the targeted screen, which is what I did, we do that on a separate report. So if the other analysts found, had a positive test, then on my report, if I didn't find anything, we would write no additional controlled substances.
So when you do the testing, there's a minimum threshold, is there not?
Correct, there is.
So there could be an amount in the sample or the specimen that just did not meet the threshold, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So if it be a prescription drug, the fact that you said a negative finding doesn't necessarily mean that a person was not taking the drug, does it?
No, so my negative screen just means that no drugs pass that threshold is what that means. So
someone could have been taking a prescription drug at some level and been below that threshold is what I'm getting at. Is that right?
Potentially, yes.
Yes. I don't have any further questions. Mr. Hoover?
Yes, me.
Just a minute.
So, Mr. Claybaugh, just so I make sure I'm understanding correctly, what you're saying is, as far as the test, did you not retest for any substance that was found positive, or it just when you retested it didn't meet the threshold?
Would you mind rephrasing that? Like, do you mean? Yeah. Would you?
Yeah, sure. So, if I understand correctly, there was an initial test done, correct?
Correct. Yep.
And it showed positive for some substances. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so when you did the targeted testing, did you not test for those substances that had already been found?
Correct. Yeah. So the substances that I tested for are all on that list. All of the ones on that list. There might be, I can't exactly remember if there's some similarities with the testing. There might be a couple drugs that are similar. But of the ones that were positive and sent on for this, I don't believe there were any that were the same. It was.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the end. I don't believe there were any what?
I'm not sure. Do you want me to? I can just kind of rephrase. I don't remember exactly what I said.
Yeah, why don't you do that?
Yeah. So I was just saying. There might be some. I can't remember exactly if there are any of the same drugs on the confirmation test with the general. There might be a few, and of the ones that were positive on that confirmational test, I don't believe any of those were are on the targeted screen at all.
Okay. So, for example, if marijuana or some derivative of marijuana was on the previous test, you wouldn't have necessarily tested it on the targeted test, correct?
Correct.
And looking through that list, the THC is not on that list, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
I don't have anything further. Thank you very much, Mr. Claybaugh. We are finished for the day.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Do we have another witness for the state?
We do, however, she will not be here till 11.
Okay.
And as a matter of housekeeping, Your Honor, I'd like to move to admit exhibits 34, 35, and 35A.
Yes, I meant to cover that. There was an agreement by the parties during the deposition. Mr. Hoover, I assume no objection?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Okay, for the record, 34, 35, and 35A are all admitted. Folks, good news, two things. We're ahead of schedule, and you get a nice break now. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Go ahead and have a seat there. State your name and spell it for the record, please.
Tara, T-A-R-A, Scott, S-C-O-T-T.
Go ahead, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. What is your present occupation?
I am a criminalist in the DNA section at the Iowa DCI Crime Lab in Ankeny, Iowa.
How long have you been there?
I've been in this position since October of 2007.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
It's been marked as State's Exhibit 36. Can you tell me what that is?
This is my SOQ, or Statement of Qualifications.
Is that a complete and accurate representation of your education, training, and work experience?
Yes.
I'd move to admit Exhibit 36.
Any objection?
No objection.
36 is admitted.
Could you explain just what it is that you do at the laboratory?
So in the DNA casework section, we get evidence that is submitted by police agencies throughout the state. We look at that, we determine if we need to do any screening for body fluids, take samples for DNA, develop DNA profiles, and then compare those to any known DNA profiles that are submitted in that case, write a report to our findings, and then testify if necessary.
Could you explain to the jury just exactly what DNA is?
DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It is the unit of heredity that is in all cells that have a nucleus in your body. You inherit half your DNA from your mother, half your DNA from your father, and it is shown to be unique except in the case of identical twins.
Where is DNA found?
It is in the nucleus. The nuclear DNA that I test is found in the nucleus of the cells. So it's in blood, seminal fluid, saliva, skin.
How do you examine items for DNA?
Depending on the item and what I'm looking for. If I'm looking for a body fluid, I will do first a visual exam in natural light. If I can't see anything with that, we have alternate light sources that we can use to try to visualize DNA. And then we do a screening test, if applicable, and take a sample from it.
How do you process DNA?
So the cutting that we take, or sample that we take, it goes into a tube, and then we do what's called an extraction, which gets the DNA out of the cells and into a solution. From that, we do what's called a quant that estimates the amount of DNA in the sample. And from that, we perform what's called an amplification that copies that DNA, and then we use a 3500 genetic analyzer to visualize that DNA profile.
What areas of DNA do you test?
There are currently 21 loci or locations on the DNA that we test.
How do you compare DNA found on evidence to a specific individual?
So we use the profile that we develop, and we also develop profiles from known blood or buccal samples, and then we make a comparison based on those two profiles to see if the alleles that are in each loci or location are the same or different.
So on about January 30th of this year, did you receive items from the Dubuque Police Department for testing?
I did.
And did you in fact perform testing?
I did.
Did you author 2 separate reports concerning your testing?
Yes.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Show you what's been marked States Exhibit 37 and 38. Can you tell me what those documents are?
37 is a DNA report that was issued on March 4th of 2024. That is my initial report. Item 38, Exhibit 38 is a report I issued on April 3rd of 2024.
Are these both true and accurate copies of your reports?
Yes, they are.
I would move to admit Exhibit 37 and 38.
Any objection?
No objection.
37 and 38 are both admitted.
So if we look at Exhibit 37, on the first page, there's a listing on there. Could you explain what that is?
That is under the heading of items as described by submitting agency. So the list lists the lab number that was assigned once it's submitted, the agency case or agency item number, and then the description that the agency gave us.
And then there's a listing of the items that you tested?
This was all that was submitted. Yes.
Okay. So you didn't necessarily test all of them?
Correct.
Why would you not test some of them?
We try to look at what would be considered the most probative evidence first, and if we develop profiles from that, we don't necessarily look at everything in the case, but we can always go back if requested to.
Your Honor, may I publish Exhibit 37?
Yes.
So of all those items, which ones did you test? Or should I start with which ones did you not?
Let's see here. The ones that I did not examine at that time were the nasal swabs, the right-hand finger clippings, and left-hand finger clippings from Tyler Dazey.
Those would be numbers 2, 3, and 4?
Correct.
And then if you go to the second page on your results of examination, that would explain that?
Yes, on also on items 15 and 16, which were the right-hand fingernail scrapings and left-hand fingernail scrapings from Jennifer Dazey.
Okay, you also did a sexual assault kit?
Yes.
And were there any findings there of significance?
Well, screening did not indicate the presence of seminal fluid on the items, and no sperm were observed, and no DNA factors foreign to Jennifer Dazey were detected in the profiles developed from the epithelial fraction of the oral sample, the epithelial fraction of the anal sample, or the epithelial fraction of the vaginal sample.
So in layman's terms, no significant findings there?
There's nothing foreign to Jennifer Dazey.
Thank you. So then you also looked at items 7 and 8?
Yes.
And these were bloodstains from the dining room and from the hallway, is that correct?
That's what they're labeled as, yes.
What were your findings on those specimens?
For item 7, screening indicated the presence of blood on the swabs from dining room, and the DNA profile developed matched the known DNA profile of Jennifer Dazey, and the probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 310 octillion.
So it's safe to say that the blood belonged to Jennifer Dazey?
Unless she has an identical twin.
And that would be the same for for number 8, 7 and 8 both?
Yes, screening also indicated the presence of blood on the swabs from hallway floor, and the DNA profile developed matched the known of Jennifer Dazey with the same statistic.
Okay, item number 9 was a swab from the bathroom sink. What were your findings on that?
Screening indicated the presence of blood on the swabs from bathroom sink. The DNA profile developed indicated a mixture of 2 individuals, and due to the mixture complexity, no further interpretations can be made.
Could you explain a little bit about what the mixture and complexity mean as it pertains to DNA?
So when I said you get half your DNA from your mother and half your DNA from your father, so you have 1 or 2 alleles at each location. When you have multiple people, you will see 3 or 4 alleles at each location. When there's not enough difference in the contributors, so if they're about equal or if there's a very low amount, you'll be able to see that you have multiple people, but you won't be able to separate the 2 profiles out.
So in other words, there was DNA there, there was just a mix and you couldn't pull out any individual people, right?
Correct.
Okay, let's look at item number 10, the hatchet. What were your findings on that?
Screening did not indicate the presence of blood on 2 stains on the blade and head of the hatchet, but screening indicated the presence of blood on 3 areas on the handle of the hatchet.
Did you do that screening for blood or did someone else?
I did.
When you handled the hatchet, what condition was it in?
I'm not sure. It was...
Did it appear to have been cleaned or scrubbed or washed?
Not that was obvious, no.
Were there, cakes of mud or dirt or anything on it?
Not that I recall.
Did you find blood on the handle?
Yes.
What were your determinations on that?
Well, I took 1 sample at this time from one of the areas, and the DNA factors detected were too weak for conclusive interpretation.
And again, meaning to lay people?
There's some DNA on there, but there's not enough to determine a profile that is strong enough for comparison.
Okay. Item number 11, you took sample from the bathtub drain. What was your findings there?
Screening indicated the presence of blood on the swabs from bathroom tub drain. The DNA profile developed indicated a mixture of 2 individuals. The profile of the major contributor was consistent with the known DNA profile of Tyler Dazey. The probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 130 septillion. The additional factors present were insufficient to determine the profile of the minor contributor.
Did you find evidence of blood in the sample that you took from the bathtub drain?
Screening indicated the presence of blood on those swabs, yes.
Was there any testing done to determine whether that was human, animal, or other type of blood?
No, the only thing I did at this time was the DNA testing after that.
Okay, so the DNA testing that you did, you found DNA, but that didn't necessarily come from the blood, did it?
It's possible it came from another source, yes.
So if someone took a shower and shed skin or hair or any other things, that could give up DNA as well, is that right?
Yes.
How does DNA degrade?
So with cleaning products, for example, in our lab, we use either alcohol or bleach, a 10% bleach solution to clean between cases and clean our racks and stuff that we put samples in. So that would degrade UV light. So that any other cleaning products and sometimes time, heat, they can all degrade DNA.
If a person had taken a shower recently, would you think there'd be a better probability of finding DNA as opposed to someone who took a shower a week before in that same tub?
Yes.
All right, let's look at number 12. And 13, we might as well do them together. Those are blood spatters. What were your findings on those?
So for number 12 and 13, screening indicated the presence of blood on the swabs from jewelry box and bedroom wall. The DNA profiles developed matched the known DNA profile of Jennifer Dazey, and the probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 310 octillion.
So when you get those samples, there may be DNA in a house, for instance, on the wall of someone, right?
That's possible, yes.
And if you have blood on there and you take that sample, is the likelihood of the DNA being in the blood higher than the DNA that would just be pre-existing on the wall before the blood was there?
Yes.
So it would be very unlikely to take a sample of blood and find that the primary contributor was the person whose DNA was on the wall to begin with, if that makes sense?
Yes, I think it would be more likely in this for blood on a wall when you take a sample for the DNA profile, especially a single source, to be from the blood as opposed to background DNA that's on the wall.
So the blood would be the primary one, as you've been talking about, right?
Yes.
And there may be other DNA mixed in, but it's going to be minimal?
In most circumstances, yes.
All right, let's look at Exhibit 38. Yes. May I publish Exhibit 38? Your Honor?
Yes.
And again, on this one, we've got 4 items listed. Did you test all 4 of those?
I did.
And this was a follow-up testing?
Yes. Yes.
You did later? Why did you do a follow-up testing?
I spoke with somebody from the Dubuque Police Department, and they requested additional testing.
Okay, so let's look at 3 and 4. What were those?
3, the screening did not indicate the presence of blood on the right-hand fingernail clippings from Tyler Dazey, and the DNA factors detected from swabs of the right-hand fingernail clippings from Tyler Dazey were too weak for conclusive interpretation.
That would not be uncommon, would it?
No. In
taking fingernail clippings?
That's not uncommon, no.
How about item number 10?
The screening indicated the presence of blood on 2 areas of the handle of the hatchet. No DNA profile was developed from swabs of the area on the SOG side of the hatchet handle. The DNA profile developed from swabs of the area under the S on the hatchet handle indicated a mixture of 2 individuals. The profile of the major contributor was consistent with the known DNA profile of Jennifer Dazey. The probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 2.5 octillion.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
And you was to mark Exhibit 14. Is that the same hatchet that you examined?
Yes, it is.
Can you see your marks on there?
Yes, I can.
Could you show the jury where you did the testing on there?
So, on this side, under the blade side on the handle, is where you can see I've circled it, and I have 10.1 listed. 10.2 is adjacent to that on the adjacent side of the handle. And then 10.3 is a small stain here under where it says the SOG here on towards the bottom half of the handle. And that's where I circled and tested that area.
So when you say under the S, that means below it on the handle, not actually under it.
Correct.
So your findings on 2 of those did not show any DNA, or you couldn't get a profile, is that right? Or am I misreading that?
Yes. So in 10.1, the DNA factors detected were too weak. 10.2, I did not develop a profile. And if that answers your question?
Yes. And 10.3 is where you did develop that profile.
Correct.
And again, that was Jennifer Dazey?
The major contributor, yes.
Yes. And you had another individual there, but that was not enough to develop the profile, is that right?
Right. There was one additional factor present that was insufficient to determine the profile of the minor contributor.
Did you take swabs of the blade of that hatchet at some point?
Yes.
What did you find from that?
Screening did not indicate the presence of blood on the blade of the hatchet, and the DNA factors detected from swabs of the blade of the hatchet were too weak for conclusive interpretation.
Could that be that there may have been blood on there which had been scrubbed or wiped away and left some DNA but not enough to make a profile?
That's possible.
Did you find any actual blood on that weapon when you tested it?
The 3 areas that screened positive for the presence of blood.
But that wasn't visible to the naked eye, was it?
No, they were small and dilute stains.
Yeah, so you had to test for that just to pull it out of there? Would it be safe to say that this weapon had been cleaned of blood at some point, leaving only that little bit of residue behind?
That's outside my area of expertise.
Fair enough. I don't have any further questions.
Cross-examination. I've got it.
$37?
Yes.
Now, and you just testified about that in some detail, didn't you?
Yes.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about a few of these things. One of the things I want to ask you about is sources of DNA. Blood is one source of DNA, isn't it?
Yes.
What other sources of DNA are there?
Saliva, skin cells, seminal fluid.
Okay. We excrete DNA pretty much all the time, don't we?
I'm not sure what you mean by excrete.
Well, for example, there's even some small amount of DNA in the moisture in my breath, isn't there?
Yes, that would be from the skin cells inside your mouth.
And when I touch something, if I'm the type of person who leaves DNA, I would leave DNA on pretty much anything and everything I touch.
Potentially.
And the longer I'm in an area, for example, if we're talking about my bedroom, or we're talking about an item that I handle on a regular basis, like a jewelry box, I could leave a lot of DNA on those items, couldn't I?
You could.
If I've been living in a location for a number of years, those skin cells can actually accumulate, can't they?
Yes.
And I understand there's some degradation, but depending on the level of cleaning and what's used to clean. And we can clean with some things and it doesn't really affect the DNA, isn't that right?
Yes.
Now, let's talk about a few of the items up here. I understand that initially you did not test items 2, 3, and 4. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, so we'll talk about those when we get over to State's Exhibit 38. The first thing I want to talk about is item number 7. Now, this is reported as being a swab from a possible blood stain in the dining room.
Yes.
Okay. And I believe we heard, well, I believe on direct examination you testified that you were able to develop a DNA profile from that?
Yes.
And that the swab tested positive for blood. Is that right?
Screening indicated the presence of blood, yes.
And I just want to make sure that I heard you correctly. Did you say that that was Jennifer Dazey's blood?
I did not.
If you did say that, that's actually more than you can say, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. You can't say that that's Jennifer Dazey's blood, can you?
No, I can only say that the profile developed from that swab matches her.
Okay. And that's for a couple of different reasons. Number one, did you test item 7 to determine if it was human or animal blood?
I did not do that test, no.
Were you aware that there was animal blood in the area?
Yes.
Okay. But you didn't test to determine whether or not the blood stain in item 7 was human or animal blood?
Correct, I did not.
And as I understand it, when you swab an area, especially if it's wet, for example, if I touch a table and I walk away, but if I get that wet with something and I swab it then, doesn't that actually increase the number of skin cells and stuff that I'm going to pull off of that item that I'm swabbing? Potentially, if there's skin cells there.
Okay.
If there's DNA, touch DNA on that item, and I then moisten it a little bit, and then I swab it, I'm going to get the moisture, but I'm also going to get the touch DNA, aren't I?
You could potentially, if there's some there, yes.
Okay. And the fact that it's moist might actually increase the likelihood that I get that touch DNA, doesn't it?
I'm not sure how to answer that question.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you know if the DNA profile that you detected, and I understand it was Jennifer Dazey's DNA to the 310 octillion or something like that. Is that right?
The statistic, yes.
Okay. Do you know whether or not that DNA came from the blood, or did it come from skin cells or touch DNA that was located in that same area that was swabbed?
That cannot be determined.
And the likelihood of whether or not it came from one or the other would depend on whether or not that was animal or human blood, to some extent, wouldn't it?
Technically, yes.
Because if it was animal blood, you're not getting human DNA from it, right?
Correct.
It would also depend, to some extent, on how much exposure to her DNA that location on the floor had, wouldn't it?
Technically, yes.
All right. And that's essentially why you're not able to tell us whether or not item 7, even though it tested positive for blood, you're not able to tell us whether or not that was Jennifer Dazey's blood.
Correct. I cannot say that, correct.
Okay. Is it fair to say that you would expect to find touch DNA and, well, essentially touch DNA or skin cell DNA from other DNA sources for someone where they live?
In some areas more than others, but yes, in the areas that they live.
Okay. Well, let's talk about some of these. Number 8 is a swab from a possible bloodstain in a hallway. Did you screen to see, well, let me ask you this. Did you screen to determine whether blood was present?
Yes.
Okay. Did you screen to determine whether it was human or animal blood?
I did not.
Were you able to develop a DNA profile?
Yes.
Do you know whether or not that DNA profile came from the blood, or could it have come from other touch DNA located on the swab?
I cannot say with any certainty that it came, I cannot say for sure whether it came from the blood, no.
Okay. And it would not be unusual to find Jennifer Dazey's DNA on the hallway floor right outside her bedroom in a house where she's lived for several years, would it?
On a general floor in a house, I would not necessarily expect to find that a large amount of DNA. So is it possible? Yes.
Okay. Did you find a large amount of DNA?
I'd have to refer to my notes to see what the estimate of that was.
Okay. Let's talk about item 9, which is the swab from a possible bloodstain in the bathroom sink. Did you screen that swab for blood?
Yes.
And was there blood present?
Screening indicated the presence of blood, yes.
Did you test to see whether or not that was human or animal blood?
I did not.
Were you able to develop a DNA profile?
There was DNA factors detected, yes.
Okay. Were you able to develop a profile?
I'm not sure what you mean by develop a profile.
Were you able to determine whose DNA it was?
No, I was not able to determine whose DNA it was.
All right. Sorry, they have our computers on a timer. With regards to, we'll skip item 10 because for the moment. With regards to item 11, that's the swab from around the bathtub drain, and I think you testified about that. It's on direct examination?
Yes.
Okay. You would expect to find a lot of different sources of DNA in a bathtub drain, wouldn't you?
There are potentially a lot of sources, yes.
Okay. Now, this was swabbed. You didn't actually see the drain. You just saw the swab from the drain, right?
Correct. I saw only the swab.
Okay. Did you screen the swab for blood?
Yes.
Okay. Did the screening test positive for blood?
The screening indicated the presence of blood, yes.
Did you test whether or not that was human or animal blood?
I did not.
And I apologize because, I mean, obviously you know what my next question is on each of these, but we still need to go slow so that she can take it all down. We can't talk at the same time. Were you able to develop a DNA profile?
Yes.
And whose DNA profile were you able to develop?
There was a mixture of DNA on this, and the profile of the major contributor was consistent with the known of Tyler Dazey.
Now, are you able to say that that's Tyler Dazey's blood?
No, I am not.
Okay. And that's because the DNA profile could have come from, well, skin cell DNA or hair DNA or any of the other sources of DNA that you would find in the bathtub drain.
Potentially, yes.
And you would expect to find somebody's DNA in the bathtub drain where they tend to bathe, wouldn't you?
I would say it would not be an unexpected finding to find their DNA there.
Okay. Item number 12. This is an interesting one. Item number 12 is a swab from possible bloodstain on the top of the jewelry box in the bedroom. Is that right?
That's what it was listed as, yes.
Okay. You didn't actually see the jewelry box, you just saw the swab.
Correct, I only saw the swab.
Did you screen the swab for blood?
I did.
And did it test positive for blood?
Screening indicated the presence of blood on the swabs from jewelry box.
Did you test to see whether it was human or animal blood?
I did not.
Were you able to develop a DNA profile from the swab?
Yes.
And whose DNA profile were you able to develop from the swab?
The DNA profile developed matched the known of Jennifer Dazey.
Now, and this may seem silly, but you're not actually able to say that that DNA profile came from the blood, are you?
No, I cannot say that.
So you can't actually even say that that's Jennifer Dazey's blood, can you?
I cannot say that.
Moving on to item number 13. That was a swab collected from a bloodstain on a bedroom wall. And I understand your testimony on direct examination was that...
An unexpected finding either.
Okay. Was item number 13 tested to determine whether or not there was blood present?
Yes, it was.
And what was the result of the test?
Screening indicated the presence of blood on the swabs from bedroom wall.
Well, did you test to see whether or not it was animal or human blood?
No, I did not.
Were you able to develop a DNA profile from the swab?
Yes, I was.
And as I understand it, that was Jennifer Dazey's DNA?
Correct.
Are you able to tell us whether or not that DNA came from the blood on the swab, or did it come, or could it have come from other sources of touch DNA on the swab?
I cannot say.
So you're not able to actually tell us whether or not that blood is Jennifer Dazey's blood either?
I cannot say that.
Let's move to State's Exhibit number 38. And I put that up there on the screen for you as well. The state didn't really talk about this one, but I think I want to talk about it just to emphasize the point. Item number 2, that was a nasal swab collected actually from Tyler Dazey, wasn't it?
That's what it was listed as, yes.
Okay. And you would expect to find Tyler Dazey's DNA in his nose, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Okay. It would be in the mucus in his nose. He's got hair in his nose. I mean, all those different sources.
Mucus and skin cells, yes.
Okay. Now, when you tested that, did you test it for the presence of blood?
I did.
Did it test positive for blood?
Screening indicated the presence of blood on the nasal swabs from Tyler Dazey.
Okay. Did you test that to determine whether or not it was human or animal blood?
I did not.
Were you able to develop a DNA profile from that?
Yes, I was.
And whose DNA profile were you able to find in the swab?
So there was no DNA factors foreign to Tyler Dazey in the profile developed from the nasal swabs.
So you found Tyler Dazey's DNA in the swab?
Yes.
Okay. But interestingly enough, you're not able to say that that was Tyler Dazey's blood, are you?
I am not.
And that would be for the same reasons we've discussed before, isn't it?
Yes.
Let's talk about item 10. All right. I understand that you screened two additional, item 10, you initially screened one area. Is that right?
I initially screened 3 areas.
Okay.
Actually, on the handle only?
Right.
Okay, so there's 3 areas on the handle that I screened initially.
When I look back at, when you screened those 3 areas initially, what did you find in your report dated March 4th?
The screening indicated the presence of blood on 3 areas of the handle of the hatchet.
Okay. As I understand it, at that time, you only tested one for DNA?
Correct.
Okay. And that would be the one that's marked on the hatchet as 10.1?
Yes.
Okay. Did you find any DNA factors at that time?
Yes.
Were you able to develop a DNA profile?
The DNA factors were too weak for conclusive interpretation.
Did you test to determine whether or not that was human or animal blood?
10.1, I did not. And
I think you said that you also tested the blade and head of the hatchet?
Correct.
But you didn't find blood on the blade or head of the hatchet?
Yes, screening did not indicate the presence of blood on blade and head of the hatchet.
Now, looking at exhibit number 38, your report dated April 3rd. You then tested 2 more spots on the hatchet, as I understand it, 10.2 and 10.3, is that right?
Yes.
Now, as I understand it, these 2 areas had already tested positive for the presence of blood?
Yes, screening indicated the presence of blood on those 2 areas.
Did you test to determine whether or not it was animal or human blood?
Yes.
Okay. And what were you able to determine?
It was human blood.
All right.
The screening test indicated.
For both 10.2 and 10.3?
Yes.
All right. And were you able to develop, as I understand it, a DNA profile on only 10.3?
Yes.
And that was the DNA profile of Jennifer Dazey?
The major contributor was, yes.
Okay. And there was a minor contributor who wasn't identifiable?
Correct.
Were you able to detect any DNA on the blade of the hatchet?
Yes.
And I know you testified on direct examination a little bit about this, but the fact that you were able to detect DNA on the blade of the hatchet what does that indicate with regards to the likelihood that the hatchet was washed or cleaned or scrubbed?
I can't say. That's outside my area of expertise. I can't say whether that indicates or does not indicate cleaning.
But you actually did find touch DNA, is what it would have to be, right?
I can't say the source of the DNA. I can just say it did not screen. The screening test did not indicate the presence of blood.
But there was DNA on the blade of the hatchet?
Yes.
Were you able to develop a profile?
There were factors detected, but not enough to make any interpretation.
With regards to the DNA profile that you developed on 10.3, all right, are you able to say definitively that that came from the blood?
No.
So you're not able to say whether or not that was Jennifer Dazey's blood?
I cannot say that.
Were you ever asked to test a shower curtain?
No.
Nothing further.
Mr. Nelson?
Thank you, Your Honor. You're a scientist, aren't you?
Yes.
You can't say much of anything in the scientific world with absolute certainty, can you?
No.
So when you're answering these questions today about certainty, that's sort of where you're coming from, isn't it?
Yes.
Absolute certainty. But in many cases, you can say there's a very high likelihood, couldn't you?
Yes.
So if you take swabs of blood off the floor and off of the jewelry box on the wall, it is possible to get other DNA, correct?
Correct.
But isn't blood usually swabbed because it's a very good source of DNA?
Yes.
So when you take a blood swab off of a wall or jewelry box or any other item, wouldn't you expect that to be the dominant contributor when you're testing for DNA, as opposed to background DNA that might have been there before?
In most cases, yes.
When you do a blood screen, that's just a test for blood or not blood, isn't it?
Correct.
And for the most part, it doesn't test for human or animal, it's just blood, right?
For those screening tests, it's just whether or not it is blood.
If you tested animal blood, would you expect to find animal DNA?
With the testing that I do, we only detect human DNA.
So if it were animal blood, you wouldn't detect anything based on your testing, correct?
I would not get a profile from animal blood with the testing that I do.
If you had animal blood, you're probably not going to get a DNA profile of Jennifer Dazey from that, are you?
It would not come from animal blood if it was her profile, correct?
Thank you. I don't have anything further.
Mr. Blair?
That's kind of a misleading question, though, isn't it? Because the swab doesn't just have the blood on it, does it?
I don't know what the swab has on it, besides that it's screen positive for blood.
Right. And if it is animal blood and you detect human DNA, that human DNA would have had to have come from some other source, right?
Yes, if it was animal blood and a human DNA profile, it would have had to come from some other source.
Okay. So when you say that blood is a dominant contributor for human DNA, only human blood is a dominant contributor for human DNA.
Yes.
And that's the problem, is that if you haven't determined whether or not it's human or animal blood, you don't know whether or not the human DNA came from the blood or from some other source of DNA.
I can't say with certainty that a profile from blood swab does not have any other sources of DNA in it.
And that's one of the reasons why you're not able to tell us whether or not any of the blood is actually Jennifer Dazey's blood, isn't it?
I cannot say with certainty that the profiles I developed from the swabs are her blood, no.
Not just with, well, not even a reasonable degree of certainty, are you?
There's no statistic or studies that I'm aware of that have tried to determine a number to put to that or a degree of certainty.
Okay. Nothing further.
Not to beat dead horses, but you can't say with absolute certainty, but you can say with a pretty high likelihood, can't you?
Yes, we do use known blood samples taken from a person to develop known profiles. So I know that you can get DNA from blood and the white blood cells that are in blood. I can't give a real number or certainty to if it was another source.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. You're free to go.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect spot for us to break for lunch.